these programs and webinars have been really useful for people over the past year, and I hope that many of you have actually joined previous seminars. Our focus today is managing and coordinating the management of heavily used sites, and thank you to all those that have presented previously. I thought they were really interesting presentation about how Scotland's working nationally. I picked up a few reflections for myself, and I'll just pose those questions now, but I really want to hear from the rest of you. How do we make sure that we focus our messaging on those key issues? And I think that came across quite strongly from the presenters. Should we continue to provide for more cars at some of these heavily used sites, or in the longer term, are there other things that we can do in terms of the new technology around e-bikes? What's the carrying capacity of those sites? And what about green travel in the future? Day visitors versus tourists, and how do we manage that balance? So those were just a few of the reflections from me, but I really wanted to hear what you all have to say. So first of all, reflections on the presentations and any additional learning or insights that you can share from your own locations. And I'd like to open that up for discussion now. If you can raise your hand, then I can pull people in at the appropriate moments. Any thoughts from anyone? Lisa C, if you could introduce yourself and just share your comments. Sorry, I think you're on mute.
Yes, apologies for that. Yes, I'm Lisa Craig Griffin. I've had, say, about 35, 40 years working in countryside management and access. I think the main thing that came out for me is how coordinated everything appeared to be across Scotland, and I don't see the same thing happening in England, which is a real shame. And I wondered how we get the English organisations to work in the same way, because they seem to have achieved a, a tremendous amount in a short period of time. And I've got no at the moment I'm working as a consultant, so I haven't got anything specific to say about my experience now.
Yes, I would agree with that, Lisa, and I wonder if anyone who has been working in Scotland could give their insight into whether they think something similar could actually work at an England scale. I'd be interested in that response. But in the meantime, our roads, I think you've got your hand up.
Hi, Ali. Hello, everyone. Rob Rhodes from the National Trust. In terms of our response, I just really agree with what was said on the call from Scotland in terms of boots on the ground. So we last year went through a tricky period where we had to lose a number of staff. We very quickly realised that it wasn't really rocket science, that we needed a lot of those people back, and we didn't necessarily bring back rangers, but what we did bring back were what we call visitor welcome staff. So that first point of contact, the face that people see when they turn up to the car park, etc. But we still are particularly challenged, and I don't know if anybody else has got any thoughts on this on the call, but where we're particularly challenged are those smaller sites that are local to communities and where they've suddenly become incredibly popular. So not necessarily the tourism hotspots, for want of a better description, but the local places. And they have often been the places where we just haven't had any resources or infrastructure. And indeed, they generate hardly any income to pay for anything. So that's our big struggle, is that local offer. And indeed, whether we know what the audience want. There's been quite a bit of discussion about new audiences. Do we really know what they want? Because we're seeing very different cross-section of society coming and visiting.
Sorry,
Ali.
I was on mute. Hannah, I think your hand went up next, and then Mike, I'll come across to you next, if that's okay.
Yeah, yeah, what you're saying about the kind of the smaller local sites, you know, over the last sort of 7 to 10 years, there's been quite a lot of sort of talk around kind of hidden gems, pushing people to the secret places that locals enjoy in, you know, for instance, I work in Pembrokeshire, and that has caused, you know, some issues, and we're a coastal national park, and so lots of our hotspots are on beaches where there isn't that infrastructure, and then pushing people to places and beaches that might have been sort of less well known in the past has actually exacerbated problems. So it's something that we're trying to look at, and we're trying to create a sort of a partnership wide process with the national park and our local authority, working with the National Trust and our sort of sustainable transport working groups as well, to see what we can do about this. But it's quite a complex issue, and you know, we're not sure how we're going to deal with it, but we're going to try and work our way through that one. Well, that's it really. It's just it's common to us as well, and it's been part of that kind of key messaging about the hidden gems, and I think maybe we need to be pulling back from that and trying to sort of take that out. But the genie's out of the bottle now, and we can't control things like Instagram and things like that, and that whole kind of bucket list culture that has really come in. So I think, you know, bringing people back to slow tourism, exploring a local area by foot or by bicycle, rather than people whizzing around a county in peak season, creating lots of congestion. That's my 2 pennies worth.
Thank you. I mean, I think we're all seeing those similar problems everywhere, and I think on Dartmoor particularly, the role of Instagram and social media in actually dictating where people go has been quite incredible over the past year. It was probably on the increase before COVID, but the impact over the last year has been very interesting, and I think one of the interesting things will be, are these trends going to continue, and how at the end of this year are we going to be feeling? Are we going to see the same problems, or is there going to be a shift in behaviour? So it'd be interesting to see where we get to next year. Mike, I think you had your hand up next.
Just remember to unmute myself before I start talking. That the number of times you end up talking to yourself on these things is quite remarkable. So from a Northern Ireland perspective, again, we look very enviously at what you've managed to do in Scotland, and we're a much smaller region, and we haven't managed to have such a joined up approach. So well done, guys. Couple of quick thoughts on some of the comments that have been raised. We're facing very similar issues in Northern Ireland. In terms of those small scale local places, one of the things we've been doing, it's just at a small scale at this stage, but we've been trying to link up sports and community organisations with local areas and the land managers. So for example, in a little river that we have that we've seen extensive use and quite a lot of antisocial behaviour on, that is managed by the National Trust. We have developed a partnership with a local canoe club who will now get access to that site and improvements to the site, but are going to start doing river cleanups, and also by increasing their footfall on the site and their presence on the site, it'll hopefully discourage the antisocial behaviour whenever there's more people who are responsible using it. So building those partnerships between sectors, I think, is a critical thing at a community level, and that was very much about a community level approach. The other thing we've been doing in Northern Ireland here is undertaking some research on the people who use the outdoors, motivations, and their connections to nature. So Cardiff University has been doing some work for us on that, but we've also had our trainee instructors at Tullymore National Outdoor Centre who haven't been able to be involved in courses. We've been sending them out to interview people using the Mourne Mountains, which is the backdrop I have here, we've seen a massive increase in the numbers using the mountains. They're only 30 miles from Belfast, and it's been, I mean, 14 times. More and Heritage Trust have captured sort of numbers that are 14 times the normal usage. So it's really exponential growth. And one of the things the trainees have been doing, have been interviewing people to try and find out their level of knowledge and about things like Leave No Trace Ireland, which is a policy system we've adopted across the island of Ireland, their knowledge of governing bodies and clubs, their knowledge of who owns the moorings and manages them, but also their knowledge in terms of their actual expertise to be there. Have they had any formal training? What equipment do they have? And that's been a fascinating piece of work to try and capture that information. And we're seeing some really interesting data coming out of that. And big differences between male and female motivations for being in certain places. So someone talked about the bucket list. Our highest peak is Sleeve Donard, and it was really interesting that if you look at the numbers going up Sleeve Donard, it's 81% male and only 19% female. But when you look at other sites in the moorings, it's almost 50-50. So there's some interesting things going on there. And also demographics. We're seeing a big shift. The vast majority of users that we've seen have been around about that 26 to 35 age range. And I think it's mainly people who can't do their normal sport, if you like, whether that's football, rugby, GAA, and are now going into the hills as an alternative. So we're hoping to keep those studies going on a longitudinal basis over the next 3 years to see how things change. And we can certainly feed the reports back through ORN. It'll be interesting to see what comes out of those.
Thank you, Mike. I think it will be very interesting, won't it, to see if some of these trends do continue. I mean, that once people get a feel and an interest and a love for the outdoors, I think it stays with them. And if these people who have climbed mountains for the first time and had that experience, I'm sure that they are going to want to come back, maybe not at the same level that they are now, but it will be very interesting to see if that trend continues. And it's good that you've got that longitudinal survey going on. I think we'd be very interested in that research from Cardiff University, because I do think at an England scale, that whole area of motivations and what's motivating people, how has that changed and what might motivate them in the future, would be really interesting to do. Claire, I'm conscious you had your hand up.
Yeah, hi, I'm Claire. I'm a surveyor with the Country Land and Business Association. I'm currently based in the Southwest region, so we're covering everything from Cornwall back up to Gloucestershire. Interestingly, one of our economic advisors thinks that the pent-up demand is going to last for at least the next 2 to 5 years. And that's basically around sort of what might happen with COVID and future lockdowns, but also that feeling that people might not feel safe quite yet to go overseas or go away from home. And that's what we're planning for with our members. Won't be any surprise to anyone on this call that we've had a lot of friction with our members. I think some of the newer visitors might forget that it's a working landscape that they're coming into. And whilst if you park close to a gateway, you might be able to get your Ford Fiesta in the gap, but a lot of our members are driving much bigger kit with a baler behind. We've also had all the issues with dogs, litter, the odd fires and wild camping. A lot of that was people who were expecting that they would just be able to get on a campsite as they always have done, were woefully ill prepared to be wild camping with your normal sort of Vango tents and things, and just not set up at all for it. So what we've been trying to do is work with our landowners to try and be a bit more of the solution to the problem. We're quite conscious that we don't want to be the finger wagging moaning, because we want people to come and enjoy the outdoors and share what we've got. So we did a lot of work on the temporary permitted development rights, which some of you might be aware of, and we're trying to steer some of our members away from the traditional idea of great, I'll offer camping, and look sort of more towards some of the temporary parking provision. I know that was quite successful with one of our members up in Cumbria, and that's starting to get a little bit of traction just to sort of try and help those situations. And we've also been working a lot on sort of signage wording, because we've got a lot of members who get a bit frustrated because there's a lot of conservation work that's happening on farms, and then they see someone with a loose dog run straight through it and they're like a bit and their initial reaction is to be quite angry, but we're sort of working on some of that signage. So I was quite interested with the light up signs being used to change messaging, because that's something we've not really used. It's been one sign that's sort of been wheeled out in our region and stayed that same message for the whole summer. Yeah.
Thank you for that, Claire. Some really interesting points. I'm really conscious that we're going to be pushed back to the main meeting in a moment, and so Alison, I think if we take your point next.
Thanks. I work for the Scottish Right to Way and Access Society, which is a charity based in Edinburgh providing advice on outdoor access. Recently we held a hustings prior to the Scottish election on public outdoor access. One of the points on which the candidates were agreed was the need to improve public transport, which was a point that you mentioned at the outset. I think the trouble with I think it's a great idea, but the trouble is that reduces your flexibility. You know, if you've got a bus or a train to get somewhere and it's full, you can't then change your mind so readily. But something that would enhance the public transport, I think, would be setting up like shuttle buses to the main spots, which would reduce the impact on the parking and the congestion on the roads and that sort of thing. There's a limit to what you can do to extend the train network when there's mountains in the way, but little buses that would help ferry tourists around, I think would help a lot. Thanks.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who's waiting to talk? Rob, is your hand up from previous? Yeah, Hannah?
Yeah, we've been having some thoughts around how we can better manage some of the hotspots with regards to cars and electric cars. And one of the things that we want to do is to try and make sure that we don't build electric car charging points in places where we don't want people to be parking. So it's a bit of that kind of strategic thinking as well. So we've also kind of got that on our list of things to be wary of, because you can then draw people so they can leave their car to be charged up eventually, and then they can jump on a round robin bus or a shuttle bus or pick up a bicycle to cycle somewhere. So I mean, that would be the ideal solution. Whether it works is another thing.
It's interesting that from a Dartmoor perspective, we've had what we have called honeypots, but the same thing as hotspots for many, many years. And the challenges of managing people to those sites are really difficult, and it does need a coordinated response. So, you know, you actually need the county council to be involved and to enforce your traffic management system, whether that's clearways or double yellow lines. You need the police involved to come and deal with antisocial behaviour, which often takes place in the evening, and therefore, you know, your ranger services might not be on site. And a couple of things that we have actually done this year is that we are looking to try and get some special constables that will be focused within the Dartmoor area that can support the ranger team if there are any particular issues that we need to deal with. We are trying to get a programme of engagement activities at those heavily used sites, because like someone has said, often people actually aren't aware that the behaviours that they're doing are negative or damaging. So, you know, there are things that we can do on the engagement side. And what we've also done is employ Dartmoor marshals, and these are people working into the evening. So they actually start work at 4 o'clock and they finish at 9:30 in the evening, and they're engaging with a very different audience who are coming out for their evening activities, for their wild camping or their wild camping experience. So there are a number of interesting things that you can do, but it absolutely requires coordination. And I think what you've done in Scotland has been brilliant, Kevin, because different organisations have got different priorities, both at a national level and at a local level. And if those priorities don't come together, then you end up not being able to deliver what you need on the ground. So I think it's really interesting what you've done, and it would be great to see if we could do something similar, even if it's on a regional basis within England.